Wagwan guys, welcome back. I got a lot to talk about today. It's going to be somewhat of a speed run. Was there a squad of 500 giant Chinese archers enlisted in the Chinese army? I've been following a YouTuber by the name of Paranormal Research, Paul Stonehill, and I discovered a video of his I simply cannot ignore, especially since I've been covering the topic of Chinese giants. I have the link for his video regarding this topic in my description. So he starts by saying in Chinese documents passed down from historical times, more than just mythology regarding giants exist. Apparently, there is evidence of their coexistence with humans. As I mentioned in my previous video, in the 12th century BC, there was a battle between humans and giants, who were about 3.5 meters tall. People outnumbered the giants, forcing them to leave the plains for the mountains. Now, this is already very interesting. In fact, it is very similar to many historical accounts of giants. As I always say, the stories are always the same. Immediately, you think of Potsdam giants existing in the Prussian Infantry Regiment number 6 from 1675 to 1806, which I also just realized is during the time of Tartary or Tartaria. That was exactly during the time of Tartary. However, at 3.5 meters tall, this army of Chinese giants was most likely true giants. So this battle between the giants and the men, these Chinese giants and Chinese people, some of these giants at 3.5 meters tall, these are most likely true giants. It's hard to imagine somebody with gigantism being able to live with that height. It's impossible. This is unlike the Potsdam giants, right? Who were mostly tall men collected from various nations to fuel Frederick Wilhelm's kink for tall men. The king just wanted some tall men in his army. Many of the Potsdam giants suffered from gigantism, limiting their effectiveness in battle, serving mostly as intimidation purposes. It's just for show. Also, the account says that the giants were chased from the plains into the mountains. So we're talking about the Chinese giants again. So they were chased from the plains into the mountains. This reminds me of the Nahan War with the man-eating giants of the Nahanni Valley. It's the same type of story. And the story of the Northern Paiutes and their age-long war with the cannibalistic giants known as the Si-Te-Cah. That's in southern United States, southwest, I believe. And in both stories, the giants were chased into caves from their homeland and exterminated with fire. It seems as if when their numbers were plenty, they lived out in the open. Even in the Chinese story, right? They were chased from the plains into the mountains. So when there's a lot of them, they live on the plains. Who wants to live in the mountains? Do you want to live in the mountains? Right? But when people threaten them, they retreat into mountain caverns. It seems as if when their numbers are plenty, they lived out in the open, unafraid of humans, and even eating us and our livestock and taking our women. However, when humans fight back, they retreat into mountainous caverns where we hear more recent accounts of giant sightings, such as the Kandahar giant. So if there's any type of recent accounts of giants, I'm not saying there's many, right? Now we got, have you heard about the news in Mexico, right? In Mexico, people, whether they're natives, well, the natives know about it. The locals know about it, right? But if you have some, like a foreigner, sometimes on the mountain ridges somewhere in Mexico, you see you see some giants, some really big guys, right? 4 meters tall, I think. Paul Stonehill then describes another serious conflict in 17 AD, where this time the people were defeated by the giants. The giants dropped large stones on the people, forcing them to retreat. The reason for this conflict was that the giants stole pets and birds from peasants in mountainous regions, right? They're obviously stealing the pets to eat them. This is where it gets interesting. The Portuguese priest Melchior Barreto described the Chinese giants in the most detail. In the 10th century, the diaries he wrote states that the giants were recruited into the army by the Chinese generals. Their height ranging from 3.5 to 4 meters tall. Outwardly, they look very much like Asians, only large. The giants talk to one another in an unknown language. So just like the Si-Te-Cah, even the Nahanni River Valley, I think, these giants, they got their own language, whatever. But because they live so close to human proximity, you can imagine if they're preying on us and stalking us in our villages, they might know what we're, some of our language. I learned. So, the giants talk to each other in an unknown language. We don't know it, but understand Chinese commands at the same time. They were bilingual. The Chinese emperor created a squad of around 500 giant archers. Melchior was a 16th century Jesuit priest who acted as a missionary in India, China, and Japan. He stayed in China for about 10 months. He was the first Jesuit priest allowed to leave Macau and enter Canton, later dying in Goa, a Portuguese colony. This account of giants is also written about in the 17th century by the English priest George Hackwill, who pointed out that due to frequent skirmishes, the giant squad halved from 500 combatants to 260. The official documents of the military chronicles of China also reflect the recruitment of mountain giants in 1555 and in 1670. So they were recruited 2 times. It was a reoccurring thing. And this whole thing, it makes sense to me, especially the Chinese strategy in war at that time, the Chinese always had a large number of archers in their armies. There would be a large number of archer regiments in the back of the army or wherever. It was a big part of their warfare. Is archery, right? Just look at the subsequent Mongols. They used archery to take over the world. And you can imagine if these giants are 3.5 meters tall, 4 meters tall, some of them, how much their bows weigh. They, if you keep them in the back of the army, they would still have a clear line of sight at the enemy, be able to shoot over your own troops. And imagine the size of those arrows, right? What that could do. It could break through shields. It could go through men and hit the men behind. Right? It would making them as archers is a great strategy. So according to Russian sources, this YouTuber, a lot of his sources come from Russian sources, and because I can't find this stuff on the internet, and thank God for these Russian sources about ancient China. archaeologists discover 9 poorly preserved 3.5 meters in length units of uniform. Giant uniforms. Traditionally for Chinese archers. Probably got the laminar, the fish scales, the scale armor you later see in the Scythians, you see in the David and Goliath. Goliath wore scale armor. I think his armor was around 140 pounds. His helmet was 30 pounds. Now just imagine the shield and sword. His sword would have been a two-handed sword for one of us. So we find these armor of giants and weaponry of the men, clothing too, but the armor and the weaponry of these giants all around the world, right? In Japan, they discovered samurai armor, giant samurai armor, and a samurai sword. A giant samurai sword, right? In China, they find giant two-handed swords too. They're just, a human can't carry it, The sword's like 140 pounds. The sword weighs as much as me. And we find this stuff all over the world. In the West, Europe, you find giant swords too, right? You got your bastard swords, you got your claymores, whatever, kingslayers, kingmakers, whatever. And these giant two-handed swords, and in the West, you got giant battle axes, right? Double-bladed battle axes. They're like 3 meters long. Can't imagine how much they weigh, right? Who's swinging that thing? Who they make that for? That'll be a later video too. All this stuff belonging to giants. So they found these giant uniforms, 3.5 meters long, traditionally made for Chinese archers. This fact indicates a clear need to create such large samples of military uniforms, obviously for military personnel of that stature. Skeleton evidence is not really known of for the 3.5 meter giants. We must take into account the Chinese are very sensitive about the history, and any archaeological finds in China belong to the state. Many artifacts found in China never make it to the public, right? I mean, did you know that there were 1,000 pyramids in China? Right? I didn't until like 5 years ago, the world doesn't really talk about this. Neither does China. So what is left of these giants who served in China? The average height of the Chinese man is around 5.6 feet. However, in the Shandong province, they found relatively large people with one man up to 1.9 meters or 6.2 feet. And in a few others, at least 1.8 meters or 5.9 feet. Those are all pretty tall for Chinese people. This is based on bone structure, with living specimens being taller, right? The actual person would have been taller. The Chinese philosopher Confucius was from the Shandong province, and he was 1.9 meters. Confucius. Shandong locals, right? And I believe there's a Chinese admiral, the admiral that led the treasure fleets around the world. That's a whole nother topic. The Chinese treasure fleets, apparently that thing, they reached North America. But anyways, apparently the Admiral Zhang He, he was a giant. He was like 6 foot something, right? He was like 6 feet. So Confucius was tall. Shandong locals pride themselves on their height. In 2015, they were found to have an average height of 1.75 meters or 5.75 feet, compared to the national average of 1.72 meters or 5.64 feet. Perhaps the people of Shandong have genetic traces of the giants. Paul Stonehill, the YouTuber, who I get getting all this information from, goes on to mention how during the 19th century, during the late Qing dynasty, a period of famine and malnutrition, and also a time when Westerners were first making inroads into the country, so they're discovering everything about China, these foreign-born merchants encountered abnormally large men. Amongst them was Zhang Zihe, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing correctly, the most famous giant of the imperial period. He was from Fujian province and was 8 feet tall, having no other abnormalities other than his height. He was possibly a true giant, right? He didn't have gigantism. He was well proportioned. He never suffered any problems at 8 feet tall. For those of you who don't know, the Fujianese are not known to be tall. In fact, they're known to be short. Imagine Sichuanese people that I talked about, right? My mom's like 5 foot tall. Excuse me. Under the advice of a British businessman, he moved to London in 1865 at the age of 24, and later he toured the world as a spectacle, being known as the Giant of Tartaria. Now that's very interesting to me, this whole Giant of Tartaria. I will get into briefly at the end. There was also Chen Yunming was, Chinese is hard, all right, guys, was a bailiff with the local imperial government office in the Yunnan province, and he towered above prisoners at 7 feet 11 inches. Almost just as tall. Imagine having that as your seal. Paul Stonehill then goes on to talk about giants all over the world and focuses on Greek mythology and the battle of Mount Olympus between the gods and the Titans, and how Cyclopses were unleashed from the bowels of the earth, throwing boulders at the Titans and sinking into the earth due to their sheer weight. We'll just get into this all briefly. Tales often speak of how these giants can swallow people whole, possessing many appendages, and their movement makes the earth tremble. That's how massive they are. The whole earth is shaking, rumbling. He speculates these Cyclopses were large machines or construction vehicles like loaders, excavators, skid steers, seemingly swallowing whole the operator once he steps inside the cockpit, whatever. As soon as he enters the machine, it looks like the machine eats him, right? He also talks about Zeus throwing lightning bolts at the Titans as ancient technology, and I agree. Randall Carlson talks about how the ancients, including ancient Vedic texts, they knew about clean plasma energy. They were using it. Or he calls it the thunderstorm generator, because it looks like a thunderstorm, like balls of lightning or plasma energy. Paul Stonehill also mentions Athena hurling fireballs or whatever, fireballs or whatever, that's what I wrote, and how that could be missile technology. So in ancient China, what do we have? We have gunpowder and missile technology, or those are rockets. Either guiding system, a homing system, missile technology, which is, the Chinese had that, right? I'm just mentioning that because if the Chinese had that, it's not too crazy. I think maybe the ancient Greeks or the Greek gods had it, right? Enough of them. Lastly, I want to go back to Zhang Zihe, known as the Giant of Tartaria. I think people at that time knew more about what we give them credit for. The idea of Tartaria was still fresh in people's heads, and everywhere we look at in depictions of Tartaria, it was like a whole other world. Tartaria was a vast swath of land in Asia depicted during the 16th and 18th century. these ancient so yeah, these ancient machines and Tartaria I will have to cover in later videos. Uh, you know, I can only do so much in one video. But yeah, that's it for now. Thanks for listening, guys.